60 pounds. That's a bushel of soybeans. Run it through a crushing plant, and it comes apart into two things: about 12 pounds of oil, about 44 pounds of meal. The oil goes into a fuel tank. The meal goes onto a ship. In the 2025-26 marketing year, American plants crushed 2.65 billion bushels of soybeans. They exported 1.52 billion as whole beans, a gap of more than a billion bushels. The widest in the 62 years USDA's database goes back. The crop still leaves. It just leaves in pieces. I'm Dale Miller, and this is the production map. One thing before we start. The soybean marketing year doesn't close until the end of August, so this season's figures are the USDA's latest estimates, not final numbers. Everything older than that is closed. If you watched the corn episode, you already know this landscape. Same states, very often the same fields. In 2025, American farmers planted 81 million acres of soybeans and 99 million acres of corn. Together, more ground than the state of Texas. But economically, the soybean is a different animal. Corn stays home. About 1 bushel in 5 leaves the country. For soybeans, it was more than 4 in 10. And in a single year, that fell to about 3.5. That is a very large number to move in 12 months. And it didn't move because Americans started eating soybeans. It moved because the biggest buyers stopped calling, and because the country had already built somewhere else to put them. One quick note before we continue. Videos like this take many hours of research, writing, and production. The best way to support the channel is simply to subscribe. It really helps, and I truly appreciate it. Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Indiana, Nebraska. Those 5 states grew a little over half of the American soybean crop. More than 80% of the acreage sits in the Midwest. If that sounds familiar, it should. It is very close to the corn map. And that is not a coincidence or a shared preference for the same weather. It is the same ground taking turns. Soybeans are legumes. They make much of their own nitrogen, which is one reason they fit so naturally into a corn-soy rotation. So a field runs corn, then soybeans, then corn again. The fertilizer bill comes down. Disease and insect cycles get broken. Neither crop has to carry the same ground 2 years running. Which means the acres are not fixed. They move. Watch what happened between 2 seasons. From 2024 to 2025, soybeans gave up 6 million acres. Corn picked up nearly 8. That is what a rotation looks like from above. The soybean doesn't have a region of its own. It has a turn, and the turn runs on a calendar. Same farm, same year on the calendar, different crop. Soybeans go in after the corn, usually in May. They are less fussy about cold ground, and they tolerate a later start. Then the 2 crops part company. Corn decides its yield in about 1 week in July, when the tassel sheds pollen. Miss that week, and the kernels never exist. A soybean plant spreads the bet. It flowers and sets pods over weeks, and if it loses one, it can set another. That moves the dangerous month. For corn, the crop is made or lost in July. For soybeans, it's August, when the pods fill and the seeds put on weight. A dry August doesn't cost you pods, it costs you the size of the bean inside them. In 2025, that stretch went well. 53 bushels an acre, a national record, and on less ground than the year before. Then harvest at 13% moisture. Cut them wetter and you pay to dry them. Cut them drier and the pods split at the header and put the beans on the ground. And then, mostly, the crop waits. Very little of it is sold the day it leaves the field. The bin on the farm and the elevator in town are what let a grower sell in March instead of October. But for a growing share of this crop, when it finally does move, it isn't driving to a river, it's driving to a factory. A crushing plant is not a refinery, and it is not a mill. It is a machine for taking a seed apart. The beans are cleaned, cracked, and stripped of their hulls. What's left is rolled into flakes thin enough to see light through. The flakes go into a solvent bath that pulls the oil out. Then the solvent is driven off and the flakes are toasted. Two products come out the other end. In 2025, across every plant in the country, an average bushel gave up about 12 pounds of oil and about 44 pounds of meal. Meal is most of the weight. Oil is about a fifth of it. And in the last 4 years, that fifth is what changed. Renewable diesel and biodiesel are made from fats and oils. Used cooking oil, beef tallow, canola, distiller's corn oil, and soybean oil. Chemically, they are close to interchangeable. What decides which one a plant actually buys is policy. Federal fuel rules require refiners to put a set volume of biomass-based diesel into the market every year. In 2025, that was 3.35 billion gallons. For 2026, the EPA raised the floor to 5.33 billion. The waste fats could not cover that. And the EPA explained why in the rule itself. Used cooking oil and animal fats are byproducts of something else, and their supply, in the agency's own words, is not responsive to increasing demand for biofuel production. Something that could scale had to fill the gap. Soybean oil did. It is now the single largest feedstock in American biomass-based diesel. And the share of America's soybean oil going into fuel went from about 1/10 in 2009 to nearly half by 2023. In 2024-25, American refiners burned about 12 billion pounds of soybean oil. USDA estimates 14.5 billion for the following year, and projects nearly 18 billion for the one after that. At that level, for the first time on record, more than half of all the soybean oil used in this country would be going into fuel, rather than into food, feed, and industry. So the plants got built. As of early last year, by the industry's own count, 68 crushing plants were running in the United States. Between the start of 2023 and the start of 2025, practical crushing capacity rose about 14%. 9 plants, new or expanded, with 7 more on the way. Now hold that next to the corn episode. In an ethanol plant, the starch becomes fuel, and the protein comes back out as distiller's grains and goes into an American feed trough. A crushing plant does the same thing. The oil becomes fuel. The meal goes to American hogs, poultry, and dairy cattle. About 2/3 of it. The difference is the surplus. When a country crushes more beans than it needs meal, the extra has to go somewhere. And American soybean meal exports hit 20.3 million short tons, a record, and the fourth record in 4 years. Nobody set out to make America the world's soybean meal supplier. That is what happens when you build crushing capacity for the oil. One correction, because it matters, and because you will see it written the other way. America crushing more soybeans than it exports is not new. Going back to 1964, where USDA's record starts, there are only 4 years in which whole bean exports beat the crush. What is new is the size of the gap: 1.13 billion bushels. The previous record was 799 million, set 2 decades ago. The direction was always there. The distance is what changed. The first leg is the same as the corn. A truck, a short distance, to an elevator, or straight to a plant. The export leg splits in two, and the split is geographic. In the last year USDA measured it, 2022, almost half of every exported soybean reached port by barge. Most of those barges go down the Mississippi toward the Gulf. Rail handles the other side of the system, and the most important rail route runs west to the Pacific. That barge share, incidentally, is exactly the same as corn's. Whatever else separates these two crops, the river treats them identically. Where they differ is at the far end. The Gulf is a route to everywhere: Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, South America. The Pacific Northwest is a shortcut across one ocean, and it was built for one customer more than any other, which is why, when that customer stopped calling, you could see it on the map. In 2024, the Pacific Northwest handled about 1 inspected export bushel in 5. In 2025, it handled about 1 in 12. This season, it has come part of the way back, about 1 in 8. The meal goes down the same river, mostly, but to different customers and closer ones. The Philippines, Mexico, Colombia, not China. And the oil, increasingly, doesn't leave at all. American soybean oil exports fell by about 60% in a single year because the domestic fuel market simply outbid the rest of the world for it. Which brings us to the buyer that changed. For most of the past 15 years, one country bought about half of everything America shipped. In 2016-17, China took 36 million tons of American soybeans, 61% of the entire export book. Then, the 2018 trade war. China's take fell by roughly 2/3. It took 2 full marketing years to recover, and the share never went back to 61. By 2024-25, China was down to 44%. Then, in 2025, it stopped. From May to October, 6 months, China booked no new purchases of American soybeans at all. Over September, October, and November, physical shipments came to less than 100,000 tons. On the 1st of November 2025, after a meeting in South Korea, the White House published this. China will purchase at least 12 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans during the last 2 months of 2025, and also purchase at least 25 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans in each of 2026, 2027, and 2028. 2 things about that sentence. It is an American statement. China never publicly confirmed it, and there is no written agreement. And the 12 million tons promised for 2 months took about 7 months of sales to fill. In May of 2026, the White House added a second commitment: $17 billion a year in American farm products. And it says explicitly that this is in addition to the soybeans. The buying did come back. As of the end of July 2026, China had taken 12.3 million tons for the season, 31% of everything the United States has shipped, and 45% below the year before. The rest of the world picked up part of the difference. Several buyers grew, some of them sharply. But here is the number that matters. Every other buyer on Earth, added together, replaced about 3% of what China stopped taking. Nobody replaced China. The crop was smaller, and what left had to go further to find a home. Brazil, meanwhile, was not waiting. Brazil passed the United States as the world's largest soybean exporter in 2012-13 and has not given the position back once. In calendar 2025, China imported a record 111.8 million tons of soybeans. Roughly 3/4 of that came from Brazil. In December, the American government announced $12 billion in bridge payments to farmers. Soybeans came in at $30.88 an acre, ninth on a list of 19, behind corn, wheat, sorghum, even oats. Here is the part that is easy to get backwards. The crushing plants were not built because China left. They were built before that, and for a different reason entirely. A fuel policy that made soybean oil worth more in a diesel tank than in a frying pan. Capacity rose 14% in 2 years, while China was still the largest customer on the books. So when the orders stopped, the country happened to be standing next to somewhere else to put the crop. That was not planning. It was timing. Start at the bottom. 1 bushel, 12 pounds of oil, 44 pounds of meal. Pull back, and it's a field that grows corn every other year. Again, and it's 68 plants turning seeds into fuel and protein. Again, and it's a barge headed for the Gulf and a train headed for the Pacific. Again, and it's a sentence in a government fact sheet that the other government never signed. America did not eliminate its dependence. It changed what it depends on, from a foreign buyer to a domestic fuel policy. And that is what a production map really shows. Not just where something comes from, but what has to keep working for it to keep moving. If you've made it this far, thank you. It tells me we're doing something right. Please remember to subscribe. It makes a real difference and helps keep this channel growing. I'm Dale Miller, and this is the Production Map. I'll see you in the next episode.